Okay, so I'm setting this up, getting ready to solder these together. Now, what you're going to see me grab here in just a second is my little soldering iron cleaner. It's basically a cotton rag that's in a little plastic tray there. I fill the tray up with water and it'll clean all the crap off of the tip of the soldering iron. But the pigtail I'm working on is the plug-in for an ignition module on a General Motors 3.8 liter V6. This one's actually in a Gran Prix GTP. The plug-in, it's got 14 different wires in that pigtail, and it was the old pigtail had actually gotten smashed between the upper accessory mount and the valve cover, and it had some wiring issues. The car would die intermittently. You'd be driving down the road and the engine would just die. So we traced it back and determined that it was somewhere in the wiring. You could actually sit there and wiggle around on the wiring while the car was running, and it would just shut off. And then if you wiggled it a little more, it would start back up. But we could not find any specific spot or wire in that section of wiring harness that was obviously bad. So just made the determination to replace all of it. And the pigtail that I'm actually soldering onto, I took off of a 95 Pontiac Bonneville with a 3/8. It's the same pigtail, same wiring. It actually uses the same color coding. It's really hard to tell. But all the wire I'm soldering in is red, so it's a little bit, the color coding is the same on either end of the red wire, but I needed to add a couple inches to it so that I could make the bends around, and it wasn't such a tight bend once you plugged it in. So hopefully we'll run into this issue again. Now, I've done some very creative editing, because this video, I had almost 2 hours of footage, and I've managed to cut it down to about 17 minutes. So a lot of what you'll see is the first, then what all been waiting for here, very last one. So I was just cutting out. Sorry about that. Neighbors had me running around on a four-wheeler up and down the road constantly for about 15-20 minutes, and it was enough to drive you insane. This is the last one that I had to solder on in the pigtail, and then I'll heat shrink all of these down. See, when I'm heat shrinking them, I'm taking my time and I'm keeping the gun back, because the problem I was running into, if I got too close, I would end up overheating the insulation on the other wires in the harness. And you want to shrink the heat, you want to heat the heat shrink up until it shrinks down and you see the glue on the inside start to ooze out the ends, and that way you know you have it sealed. But I just worked my way through the whole harness, and cut my heat shrink tube in the length, and then put them on there. The downside of doing this side of it, I had to work one wire at a time because I did not want to completely rely on the color code, as some of the wires over time the whites had turned yellow, some of the yellows had faded, and it was hard to see the accurate coloring on the stripes on some of the wires. So I wanted to make sure I did each one at a time so that the wires were reconnected to the appropriate pin in the connector. I did manage to find something magnetic when I started, but I was having a lot of issues. I got more and more of the wiring harness soldered together, so I ended up, later on you'll notice, I laid a pry bar in there, and I actually stuck the soldering clamp to the pry bar, and I was using the pry bar to hold down the finished sections of the wiring harness. Sorry for the focus issues with this camera. I had switched over because my memory card in my GoPro was filling up, so I switched over to my Sony Handycam, and for some reason it wasn't focusing on the wire where I was working, it was focusing on everything else. So I know that wire is a little bit out of focus, or at least it seems that way to me. So here in just a second you're going to see the spot where I burned the snot out of my hand. This is why you have to be careful. The soldering iron I had rested up on the fender strut, and I hadn't touched it all evening, and I just had a moment of not thinking about it, reached back, kind of set my hand down for a second, and that was all it took, and it got me right below the lowest knuckle on my pinky finger. Alright everybody, so here's the point where I burned myself. In just a second I'm going to accidentally set my hand down directly on top of my soldering iron. Right now. And you can kind of see the damage there. Didn't really blister up, it burned their skin really well. So I'm going to be alright, but believe me, it doesn't feel good. This is where you have to be careful when you've been working all day and you're starting to get tired and you're not thinking real clearly. Because where I had that sitting was in the wrong spot, and I just set my hand right on top of it. wires get split loom around them. I put a second layer of split loom on them because I ended up routing them directly beneath the spark plug wires, which is not really the best place because you can get some interference, but I didn't want to run them back underneath of that accessory mount where they got smashed. And I don't think they actually got smashed. I think what happened was the vibrations pulled them in where they were just getting really squashed, and it didn't do them any good. So I got some dielectric grease in the connector, made sure it was good and tight onto the ignition mount. It sits right below the coil packs there. And we are now going to cut to the moment of truth and see if she'll start. There she is, guys. It took a second. This engine takes a second for some reason or other to smooth out. It does have 260,000 miles on it. So anyhow, give me a thumbs up, comment if you'd like. Please subscribe to the channel, and hope to see you again soon. Share this with a friend, please. Have a nice day.